Thank you very much for the organizers for also allowing me to switch between my poster presentation and my oral presentation. This is a topic that I feel very strongly about, and I hope to convince you of some changes in thought and thinking in a different paradigm about this topic. So some of the things we're going to talk about is what compels us to erase the face of odious criminals from our history. Why do we feel an urge to do that? The first time I came across this topic 10 years ago, I was shocked. I mean, actually, I found an email that I wrote to my father. I was like, I can't believe, this is happening. How could these names be in our literature? And the other question we have to ask ourselves, does erasing the crimes of the past help us avoid them in the future? So as an introduction, eponymous distinction in medicine is perceived as one of the greatest honors that we as physicians can give a fellow physician. In the mid-1990s, there were widespread calls for revoking the eponyms of physicians that were discovered to have been associated with the crimes of the Third Reich. A brief literature review demonstrates that it's about 10 to 2. 10 articles calling for the removal of these eponyms, and only 2, and those being letters to the editor, were calling to leave the eponyms for some of the reasons I'm going to describe here today. In May 2014, I called a similar call at the Nahariya conference, and it was rather well received, but we didn't do much with it. In May 2017, you all here have a choice, and we can decide to include this as part of the very important declaration that's going to be put together and published at the end of this conference. I hope to convince you to do so on Thursday. I won't be around to discuss it, unfortunately. So as an introduction, I think there's a compelling, however counterintuitive argument and rationale for preserving these eponyms based on the following considerations: ethical and professional duties, education and practical imperatives, principles of law and Jewish tradition, and finally, lessons of history. As a very brief rationale that you can follow through on the whole presentation, rather than erasing the past, why don't we use it? And honoring and remembering are not one and the same. Erasing the crimes of the past doesn't help us avoid them in the future. Name changing is actually a form of historic revisionism, and it contributes to the obfuscation of the role of physicians in the Holocaust, which is already unclear. And that's what we're doing here 70 years later, discussing it. By removing the names, we're also passing up a unique opportunity to educate on the topic. And renaming actually has the opposite effect that's intended, and it further obscures the legacy of Nazi medicine rather than addressing it up front. So where did this age-old tradition of purging historical records come from? As historians here, we'll take a little stroll down the historical evidence of when did this start. So it seems the first civilization, ancient Egypt, actually had such a habit. A rather successful female power, the second female power of the Egyptian dynasty, was known for the temples that she had set up, and her stepson, who was actually a co-ruler for a short period of time until he knocked her off, he started a process of eliminating her memory. It didn't work out because we still know of her. It probably looked something like this.
Let the name of Moses be taken from every book and tablet, stricken from all pylons and obelisks, stricken from every monument of Egypt. Let the name of Moses be unheard and unspoken, erased from the memory of men for all time.
So, despite the dramatic effect, Paro obviously did not succeed. And last I checked, the Bible is still the bestseller, and Moses appears there extensively. Now, the Romans actually institutionalized this and gave it a name, damnatio memoriae, which is a condemnation or a damnation of the memory of the individual. It was a systematic destruction of a person's memory by the state and government decree. It was considered a punishment worse than execution and the fate of being forgotten forever. The name of those damned were scratched out from all media that existed at the time: inscriptions, bills, documents, coins, statues, and paintings. It usually symbolized the end of one reign and the beginning of another. A famous example is Caracalla, who murdered his, again, co-emperors don't seem to get along too well, his brother, and then damned him to damnito memoriae. Here's an inscription on the wall where his brother's face as a child is scratched out. Modern-day Egypt practices the same. When Mubarak fell, an Egyptian court ordered that Hosni and Suzanne Mubarak's names and images be removed from all public places, schools, and streets. Now, damnito memoriae wasn't just a government act. There's a part of it that serves a popular need of the people, and maybe of a profession. Where we engage in destruction can serve as a cathartic process. It's a chance to vent our frustration over a corrupt regime and senseless brutality, and then society can be liberated from the persistent shame of having had that history as part of it. We see this over and over. You'll see in other scenes I'll be showing here, where the masses take to obliterating that memory that they find so distressful and upsetting. So what does it look like in modern history? You know, with technology, we can just click a button and erase the past. So Stalin perfected the technique under the Great Purge, where generals and co-patriots that he just didn't like, after assassinating them, he had them photoshopped out of the pictures. There are numerous examples of this online. Leon Trotsky didn't get along so well with Stalin. He was a competition, so he takes him out of famous pictures with Lenin. Mao Zedong learns the same process. Again, a general who fell out of favor gets knocked off from the official textbooks and pictures of the state. North Korea. Kim Jong-un's, again, in the tradition of other totalitarian states, is just knocking off his relatives and then taking him, airbrushing them out of the pictures, expunging them. So what's the present look like with, again, the digital ability and social media, where you've got, names are so prevalent? I always find it amazing every time I speak about this topic. If I Google the names again, I can find more images that people have uploaded, more information that people in this audience maybe have uploaded, but others are disappearing, obviously. So there's an app out there that can delete some bad memories of an ex-girlfriend on social media or an ex-boyfriend. Like, how do you do that? You're intricately woven in social media with these people now. We need to find an effective tool to remove them. Now, yesterday's newspaper shows, on a less humorous note, that this is really a major issue in the world today. What do we do with the social context of monuments, trophies, flags, of symbols that have fallen out of favor and are considered socially repugnant? New Orleans tempers a flaring there over the matter. I'd make the argument that there's a major distinction here between a flag, which is a symbol of political power, monument, which is a constant reminder, naming of a building, which we'll see soon, which is something somebody has to live in and work in and spend his time in, as opposed to eponyms, which are just tributes of acknowledgement of a medical accomplishment by an outstanding physician. So Rhodes must fall. Cecil Rhodes, entrepreneur, successful businessman, eventually one of the prime ministers of Cape Town at the turn of the 19th century. His statues are all over South Africa and in England. In South Africa, they were defaced, and there was a movement to decolonize education, and Rhodes must fall. The hell with the Rhodes Scholarship, and the ability that the Rhodes Scholarship and the tremendous fortune he had left Oxford University to bring students from different countries throughout the empire to study at Oxford came under scrutiny. In Oxford, they decided to keep the name, however, educate on some of the shortcomings and some of the complexity of Cecil's history. In South Africa, after defacing the monument, they removed it. There was another scene where the crowd actually vented their frustration with it. On this reference, I'm indebted to an eminent historian, Jonathan Sarna of Brandeis University, who I discussed this with, and he said, oh, this is exactly the issue that Yale University dealt with, and actually had a back and forth on it a few times in the last 2 years. So John Calhoun was an eminent statesman and a political theorist from South Carolina. He was also a vice president and one of the most outspoken theorists in favor of slavery, the South's and individual states' rights, and the father of what was seen as secession. He actually passed away in 1850 before the secession, but he laid the theoretical framework for states to secede. Yale University received a large donation in the 1920s. In the late 20s, decided to name the dormitories of one of those dorms, Calhoun College, after its graduate, John Calhoun, who was an eminent statesman. So must John Calhoun fall as well? To understand the caliber of his statesmanship, at his eulogy, it was said by the Senator Thomas Benton that he's not dead. There may be no vitality in his body, but there is in his doctrines. In 1957, the Senate committee chaired by John F. Kennedy selected Calhoun as one of the 5 greatest United States senators in history. Now, other noted historians have said that your ordinary run-of-the-mill historian will tell you that John Calhoun, having defended bad and lost causes of states' rights and slavery, deserves to rest forever in the dustbin of history. Nothing could be further from the truth. No American public figure after the generation of the Founding Fathers has more to say to later times than Calhoun. Now, in favor of removing the name, a professor of American history at Yale said, "Have you ever reflected on how it might feel to go to school and be assigned a residential college by the name of Joseph Goebbels? Would you be comforted if the administration assured you that the naming helps us grapple with our past, while most of our peers continue to say, well, what's the big deal about Goebbels anyhow? Just get over it. It's part of our tradition." In favor of maintaining the name, the president of Yale University's initial statement on the matter was such: "Erasing the name of a much-beloved college risks masking the past, downplaying the lasting effects of slavery, and substituting a false and misleading narrative, albeit one that might make us feel good and self-congratulatory. However, retaining the name forces us, as a profession, I will say here, to learn anew and confront some of the most disturbing aspects of our professional past." Changes here are mine. "I believe it's our obligation as educators on the topic to maintain these names." An interesting editorial a year ago on the topic at the Washington Post said that Yale doesn't need to get rid of Calhoun College. It needs to create a real slavery memorial, a real monument to document and to be an edifice of the crimes of slavery. Changing the name doesn't do that much. And allowing more, and even more so, allowing Calhoun to stand in for all the other men, and this article, very interesting, goes through all the other colleges of people that owned slaves, profited from slaves. They might not have been the most outspoken and articulate proponents of slavery, but they all enjoyed it, and they all have halls named after them. And by choosing him as a certain scapegoat, we actually simplify the legacy rather than fully illuminating it. I think the same is true of the eponyms. There were some outstanding Nazi physicians who earned those eponyms well before they committed any crimes, doing what was considered real science that we are based on till today. And yet, by removing those names, I feel that my colleagues, when I speak about this, have a sense of, oh, you know, we've purged ourselves of some of those crimes, and that's not what we're spending an entire week here talking about. What about ethical and legal responsibilities? So, the crime of spoliation of evidence is a destruction or alteration of evidence to a crime. As physicians, we have an ethical and professional duty to preserve the integrity of medical records. Anyone caught trying to alter medical records after a lawsuit has been placed, that's a big no-no. Okay? And society in the mid-90s placed us with a challenge. What were these physicians doing practicing medicine and outstanding in their field and respected by their contemporaries? What were they doing in the Nazi Party? How did that happen? And instead of dealing with it, we're going to expunge the record. Expunging eponyms of Nazi physicians invariably leads to tampering with the medical record and is a form of negligent, not intentional, but negligent spoliation of evidence, of a crime which we all welcomed the 2012 declaration, which wasn't committed by the individual physicians. But these outstanding physicians are symbolic of the fact that the institutional medical environment and professionals were involved in these crimes, and not just these individuals. What about Jewish tradition? I get a lot of this when I speak about it in Hebrew, and some of the slides here are purposely on Hebrew. There's the concept of how we deal with Amalek. All right? In the same sentences in Deuteronomy, there are two conflicting, they would appear to be, demands. One is to remember what Amalek did to you, and the other is to obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens. Don't forget. What does that mean? From here, actually, from this sentence actually stems the acronym that it's traditional to add to the, alongside the names of the Jewish people's worst enemies and foes, which is Yimach Shmo, obliterate his name. And the curse is that the cursed individual should disappear from earth, or in the words of the Bible, from under the heavens, and will not merit to have offspring. Nowhere does it say that the name or the memory should be erased, and that's how we can, on the one hand, remember what Amalek did to us, and on the other hand, are commanded to not allow their progeny on. As an educational imperative, every time I speak about this, people mention to me, oh yeah, I teach about this as well. So, radiology, that's what I specialize in, we're constantly taking cases. Okay, so what do you see? Describe it. Okay, now give me a differential diagnosis. So we give differential diagnoses. I find eponyms very useful as a mnemonic technique. And then I open it up to, okay, why are these eponyms named such, and who are these individuals? And then I go right into the biographies of these individuals. And these were all outstanding physicians that really merit the name. If you look up the eponyms, there are over 18,000 eponyms in medicine. All right? And I love this book, On the Shoulder of Giants. Eponyms, more than anything else, demonstrate how we as physicians literally are standing on the shoulder of our forebears and our giants. And each of us may be average physicians, but because there were outstanding physicians before us, we're able to diagnose correctly and treat correctly. Sir William Osler said it well, that it helps a man to be immensely to be a bit of a hero worshiper, and the story of the lives of the masters of medicine do much to stimulate our ambition and arouse our sympathies. There's a wonderful site, which is how I actually started getting exposed to this when I was studying for the board. It's called WhoNamedIt.com, where it highlights the biographies of these physicians. So, I have a 2017, based mostly on the article by Strauss and Edelman, who discuss a variety of eponyms and approaches to dealing with them. I can identify about 18 eponyms of physicians that are tainted due to their involvement with the Nazi cause. Now, what's it going to look like in 2047? No worries. I'm just going to delete some bad memories. How are we going to educate on this? Who's going to believe me when I walk into a class of medical school students 30 years from now, when I tell them that there were outstanding physicians that were leaders in their field that partook in the Nazi party? They'll be like, oh, you mean Mengele? That was like quack science what he was doing. Like, I'm like, no, big names, big guys. They're like, who? What are you talking about? Because the memory will be completely erased. So people tell me it's an uphill battle, and I'm behind the ball. It's too late in the game. 2 minutes and we're wrapping it up. And up against Herculean forces. I mean, who's going to take on all the editors and all the publishing houses that have taken it upon themselves to blot out these names? You will. So in summary, erasing the crimes of the past doesn't help us avoid them in the future. They're unintended consequences of sanitizing medical literature's landscape. Preserving eponyms as historical artifacts is an important reminder of the complexity of the history and the legacy of Nazi medicine for future generations. We can help draw the attention to this history, do justice to the complexity of the debate, and be true to our educational mission as educators on medicine after the Holocaust by calling to preserve these names. I've been asked to publish it, another letter to the editor, a brief article is not going to make a difference. A declaration might. As physicians, we have to face up to the unpleasant facts of history, and some that we don't like, and talk about them and make sure we debate them. I sent out a suggestion for an amendment to the declaration that we're going to be publishing at the end of the week for you to consider, and I would love to hear your input on it at this point.